Good morning and welcome. My name's Ed Boyajian. I'm the president and CEO of EnterpriseDB, and we are a worldwide provider of products and services based on Postgres, and also a major contributor and supporter of the Postgres community.
My name is Bruce Boyajian. I'm one of the Postgres core team members. I've been involved with Postgres for about 15 years. So I'm going to be talking to you in a minute, but first Ed's going to talk to you.
Great, thanks. So we wanted to take a little bit of time at this event. I'm sorry? Oh, I'm not on the right slide. There we go. We're going to talk about the state of the elephant. We wanted to use a little bit of the time to give you an update on what's been happening with Postgres. And it's been an exciting few years for Postgres. And actually, by show of hands, how many of you are familiar with Postgres? Okay, that's impressive. We've seen a tremendous amount of growth in Postgres, and we just wanted to talk to you a little bit today about what we're seeing, what trends we see happening. Bruce is going to talk a little bit about technology and history. But before I get started, I think there are probably three primary reasons we've seen a very steady growth and an acceleration, particularly in the past 2 years, around the adoption of Postgres in commercial use. I think first and foremost, the technology itself has improved steadily over the past, really through its lifetime, but especially over the past few years. And Bruce is going to talk to you about what that means. I think secondly, the commercial ecosystem that now supports Postgres is numbered in the hundreds of companies, and that is a full range of companies, and I'll talk about some of those examples as we go on. And the third is pretty obvious. With the economy in the condition it's in and IT budgets in the condition they're in, users are looking for options to more expensive proprietary database alternatives, and Postgres is filling a need for many of them. I think you've probably, those of you who are familiar with Postgres understand that the broad distribution of Postgres, but this is a heat map that shows users of the community version of Postgres, and you'll see some highlighted dots there. Those are actually public references that now number in the hundreds, but there are thousands of active Postgres users around the world. And we estimate now that the Postgres is downloaded on an annual basis in the range of 8 to 9 million times a year. Now, that's not just downloads that come from the community. That counts probably in the range of 3 to 4 million, but that's because Postgres is included in every other major Linux distribution, both the commercial and the open source versions. But Postgres has reached many and is now used by thousands. And so let's talk just for a minute about some of the benefits. Some of you who are familiar with Postgres probably know all of these benefits, but I wanted to highlight them, especially for those of you who may not be familiar with the technology and a little bit more detail on the project. The license is incredibly user-friendly. It's a BSD license. Technically, it's the Postgres license, but only over a small word change or two, not in principle. There is no one company that owns Postgres. There are many of us, like EnterpriseDB, who bring products and services to market, but Postgres, much like Linux, is truly an independent open source project, and I think that's one of the things that gives it its strength. It's governed by a core team of 6 major core team members, of which Bruce is one. They're represented across 5 companies. If you look at the code base, it's historically been a meticulously maintained code base. And for those of you who have worked with the code or know others in the community will appreciate this. And I think for the guys that work with this code talk about it as being a joy to work with in just its quality and the nature of the technology. And you can build from Postgres. You can build Postgres from source in under 10 minutes. So I think the legacy of Postgres being harder to work with has changed dramatically in the past few years. I mentioned before the tools and the ISVs. I think there was a period of time where the Postgres ecosystem, those vendors around Postgres that support the technology, was rather limited. That's really changed. I think some of that's changed because there's more companies like EnterpriseDB who are putting more focus and emphasis on commercializing the technology, which brings more customers and users in to the technology, which means there's more demand on the ecosystem to produce products and services to support the technology. And I think now you can find, if you're an enterprise customer, at our place we have over 900 customers now, fast approaching 1,000. That's a dramatic change in just 2 years, and I think what we're seeing is that demand is creating an ecosystem of other supporters for the technology that's growing quickly. We have also found that Postgres is becoming much more developer-friendly and more tools and technologies, and the community itself worried about bringing developers into the Postgres world. And I think that's been a big transition for Postgres and one of the things that's helped grow this community. You'll see comments there, extensive extensions for web development. I think those of you who know PostGIS know that it's probably one of the best implementations of geospatial available for any database. It's truly state-of-the-art for an open source project. I think that's impressive. So let's come back and put a face on it. I said that there are a lot of users in the world that are touching Postgres. This is just a heat map that shows some in the United States, but when you dig in a little further, there are real companies behind this. And it's interesting if you think about where Postgres is popular, and I often get asked the question, so who uses Postgres? Is it small or medium businesses? Is it large enterprises? Is it government? And the simple answer is yes. That what we found now is virtually every major government agency in North America and many abroad use Postgres as a mission-critical database in their infrastructure. We see use cases across all industries and a variety of different use cases. We find that it is highly valued not only in mission-critical cases, but also non-mission-critical cases. And I think it's fair to say that the predominance of uses for Postgres today are still in non-mission-critical uses, but that's quickly changing, and we're finding that in our experience that companies that are using Postgres and non-mission-critical, they're using it as a stepping stone to get to broader mission-critical deployments. And this is a very similar experience for those of you who were around Linux. I got involved with Linux back in 2001 and 2002, and at that time it was very, while there was a lot of talk about Linux, adoption was rather narrow, and we started through the acquisition of customers, doing file and print and web servers, and then we graduated to support a database. And until we proved that technology could work under more mission-critical use cases, we had to grow into that. We are seeing that same phenomenon happen with Postgres today. And then if you just go one step further, there are real people who talk about Postgres. So I encourage you, if you have a minute, you want to see the case studies and the user testimonials. We put some up on our website, but there's even more available on YouTube. I think it's an interesting way to get a perspective on who uses Postgres and why, and personalize it a little bit and give you an insight about what's been happening with the technology. So let me do this. If I could, bear with me, if I could ask you all to stand up. Could everybody just please stand up for me? That's partly because we've been going for over an hour now, and I'm sure for my colleague Bruce, I don't keep you tired. All right, so for those of you who have actually never used Postgres, you can sit down. Okay. For those of you who have only been using Postgres 1 year or less, you can sit down. Okay? If you've got 3 years or less, you can sit down. Okay, 5 years or less, sit down. Excellent. Okay, so for those of you who have been using 5 years or more, let me applaud you. Everybody give these guys a round of applause. You guys can sit down. Thank you. We're very pleased at this event to have a number of good Postgres sessions. I think there are a total of 11 sessions and some extraordinary people here from the Postgres community. Not only folks from our shop, but Selena Deckelman's going to do a talk, and I think Greg Smith is here. He's going to do it, and Jeff Davis. We got Bruce, Robert Haas, and a bunch of great talks. I urge you to go to them. I think you'll learn a lot more about Postgres. But to share a little more about some of the details of what's happening technically, I'm going to introduce my colleague Bruce. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thanks everybody. It's great to be here. I am a Postgres core team member, but also an EnterpriseDB employee, so kind of wearing both hats. I'm going to be here really to talk about the community side of Postgres. Ed did a good job of covering the business aspects and sort of why companies choose Postgres. But I think I have some interesting things to say. Of course, this is a MySQL audience, so I'll try and sort of address some of the questions you might have about Postgres. And how it's a little different, or why you might want to consider it, or at least just give you an idea of what we've been doing for the past 15 years when I sort of started. The title of this talk is the state of the Postgres elephant. And I often get the question, well, why is it an elephant? Well, years ago, everyone had a sort of animal mascot, and of course, MySQL had the dolphin, and others had different animals like a camel and so forth. We chose the elephant because it's an animal that's considered to have a long memory. Elephants never forget is the sort of standard phrase, and we thought that applied very well to Postgres. Never mind that an elephant was sort of slow and lumbered around. We had to accept that with the other parts, so we tried to shake that aspect, but it was sort of true in the beginning, because Postgres, of course, came out of a university, Berkeley, up in San Francisco area, and when I originally started with it, when I originally brought it out to the internet, so that instead of being developed within a university, it was developed now within the growing internet volunteers who could work on Linux and Apache and all the other tools that we're familiar with. It was a research project. It was developed by PhD students. The big joke back then was, everybody's PhD thesis was dumped into Postgres. And that's kind of what we got when we started in 1996, because it had a lot of cool researchy stuff. It was an object relational database. You could plug in new languages and new data types and new functions and things that other databases really couldn't do. But again, in terms of being ready for production deployment 15 years ago, it needed a lot of work. So one of the reasons I got involved, because I felt that it had potential. It looked like a pretty good code base. It was similar to a lot of the commercial relational databases that I used. But what really attracted me was I was always curious, how do those relational databases work inside? How do they parse a query? How do they understand how to optimize it? I could see a little bit when I looked in like Informix or Ingress, and I could see the query plan a little bit. But how does it do that? And that's really what drew me to Postgres many, many years ago. And fortunately, because the technology at the core was sound, we were able to develop a very robust database fairly quickly within a number of years that allowed us to start to take on real workloads. People started replacing commercial databases with Postgres. And as they say, the rest is just history. Why am I here? I mean, why am I at a MySQL conference? I'm like, wow, that's kind of interesting. Well, I was we had a Postgres conference in New York 2 weeks ago, and we had MongoDB there. And MongoDB was there because there was a growing realization within the database world that one database doesn't fit all. Again, when we started in 96, there was Postgres, and it was sort of like Oracle, like Informix, like Ingress, and Postgres has had to sort of struggle being like real large commercial databases all this time. MongoDB, and to a large extent MySQL, I think was one of the first to really revolutionize the idea that you don't have to be like everything else. You can sort of define your own market. And MySQL's real core market at the beginning was web-backed databases, and that allowed them to grow very, very quickly within the first 5-10 years of their work. Postgres, really struggled with that because, again, we were like the commercial databases and offered similar functionality. So the neat thing is, 15 years later, we now have conferences all over the world. We have a large user community. I'm going to show you some of the features that we released in Postgres 9.0. We have Postgres 9.1 coming in a couple months. So it's kind of been a long road for us. Sort of like the tortoise and the hare. We just kind of kept going at it, growing slowly each year. It's hard to say what the future holds, but I'm pretty happy. We think we've made really good strides. A lot of large organizations rely on us, but it is different. It is a different type of product than MySQL. I think it offers some things that might interest some people in the audience. But again, it's really a question of what fits best for you. And of course, we see a lot of the growth in the NoSQL area with people saying, I don't really want a traditional database. I want something a little different. MySQL, of course, really pioneered that, I would say. So let me show you some things we have coming up in Postgres. This is first, we're going to talk about the 9.1 release, the 9.0 release. That was done in September of last year. That had a lot of big features. Probably the biggest one is replication. We've had a lot of demand for replication. Postgres initially took the approach that replication should be done externally. We basically developed a suite of solutions that basically had all sorts of options that you could use replication for. However, we basically decided that the idea of log shipping or binary log shipping was really something that should be in the core of Postgres, and we were able to add that in Postgres 9. We basically called it streaming replication. It's a case where you're taking the transaction change logs, you're shipping it to a standby, and that standby is applying those regularly. In addition, you can also run read-only queries on that standby, which was, again, something that was very important for people who were trying to do offline reporting on other servers and so forth. We did a lot of work in Inplace Upgrades. I know that had been a sort of a sore point for people up until this feature was developed. We basically required everyone to dump their database and reload it to go from one major version of Postgres to another. Not the minor versions, but the major ones. So that was a big thing for our user base. Fortunately, EnterpriseDB contributed some code. I was able to work on it for like 6 months, and eventually we got it working. So that's sort of a big highlight for people. We have a very good reputation for standards compliance. I don't know how many of you are aware of that. When I originally started with the system, it wasn't that standard compliant, but we've made great strides in the past. Really, in the first couple years, we basically focused on standard compliance, and now, in fact, we're known probably as one of the best in terms of standards compliance. I know, for example, SQLite, when they're looking at implementing SQL, they just basically look to Postgres and they implement that. So obviously, people have realized that we have done very well. We're continuing to add things like performance for triggers, column triggers, conditional triggers, so you don't fire a trigger every time if you don't need it, and data warehousing things like windowing functions. I know that sounds kind of weird, but the windowing function is sort of this special aggregate you can run on a subset of your result. It's hard to explain in this really short talk, but people who are doing data warehousing, things like rank and group summing of windows, those are very important for them. Stored procedures, as I said, Postgres, even back in 96, had a plug-in ability to load in languages that would run in the server, things like PLPGSQL. You can run Perl inside, you can run Python inside, you can run PHP inside, you can run Java inside, you can run shell script inside, which is kind of interesting. And we continued to enhance that. We had Tim Bunt, I think, the Perl guy. He helped us with Postgres 9.0. We had another guy actually helping us with Python. So we've had some of the real luminaries come in and help us with basically our stored procedure language. Of course, we've had a Windows port for years. We finally got the 64-bit Windows port working. A little work there, kind of to get that kind of polished up really good. So that's about all I want to talk about in Postgres 9.0. Let's see what's happening in 9.1. We're basically in Alpha 5 at this point with Postgres 9.1. We probably have another, I'd say, a couple weeks until we go to beta. And probably going to be 3-4 months until we get to a final 9.1. Again, Postgres is very good, reliably putting out major releases every year. If you go back and actually look, as I have historically, you can pull up a spreadsheet and it shows basically, like clockwork, for 12 to 14 months, you see those major releases coming out. And fortunately, we've had very good reputation for reliability because our community is very dedicated, because we know that you trust us with your data, so therefore we have a very high quality release process that somehow manages to catch all the issues before we go final. So things coming in 9.1, unlogged tables. This is something that avoids the logging or the overhead for transactions for specific tables. Obviously, this is to address the NoSQL requirement that a lot of our people have. Secondly, SQL Med, the ability to pull data out of external sources, particularly flat files, but of course also external databases and so forth. That is available. Another feature, we have some improved geospatial support and synchronous replication. This allows you not only to replicate to a standby, but to wait for that standby to acknowledge that it's received the data. So therefore, no matter what happens to the primary, you know your data is permanently stored reliably on that standby server. Finally, SE Linux integration for improved security. So you have the same security credentials that you have in your operating system can now be pulled up into your database. Finally, a whole bunch of SQL stuff, per column collations, things like non-select, nearest neighbor stuff, serializability improvements. That's about all I wanted to say. I appreciate your time. I know, this is a little odd, but I hope that was informative for you. And hopefully, maybe someday, when you end up using Postgres, this will make sense to you. Thank you. Bye-bye.